Picture yourself beside a lonely campfire on a cold prehistoric night. It's 50,000 BC. The sun has already disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving only darkness behind. There are no cities, no roads, no electricity, and certainly no phones demanding your attention. The only light comes from the fire in front of you. Its flames crackle quietly while thick smoke drifts through the cold night air. Every few seconds, another cloud rolls directly into your face, making your eyes water and forcing you to cough. For countless generations, this was simply part of life. But somewhere in humanity's distant past, something unexpected happened. One person stopped pulling away from the smoke. Instead, they leaned closer. They breathed it in on purpose. That single decision may have marked the beginning of one of humanity's oldest traditions. Not cigarettes, not cigars, not tobacco, smoking itself. Because most people think the history of smoking begins with tobacco. It doesn't. With tobacco fields or colonial trade. It didn't begin with Native American ceremonies, and it certainly didn't begin with the invention of cigarettes. In fact, the desire to inhale smoke may be older than farming, older than civilization, and perhaps even older than our own species. And the evidence behind that idea is far more convincing than most people realize. To uncover the origin of smoking, we have to go back to humanity's first relationship with fire. Long before humans built cities or wrote history, they gathered around flames for survival. Fire provided warmth during freezing nights, protection from predators, light after sunset, and eventually the ability to cook food. It became the center of human life. The oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire comes from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dating back nearly 1 million years. Deep inside the cave, archaeologists discovered burned plant ash and charred animal bones. These weren't the remains of a natural wildfire. They were the unmistakable signs of fires that had been deliberately maintained by our ancient ancestors. That single discovery forces us to rethink the entire timeline. Because 1 million years ago, Homo sapiens didn't even exist. The individuals sitting around those fires were Homo erectus. Their faces looked different. Their bodies were different. Even their brains were different. Yet every evening they gathered around the same flames for reasons we would instantly recognize today. And every single time they did, they breathed smoke. Not occasionally, not by choice, every single day. For hundreds of thousands of years, smoke wasn't unusual. It wasn't something special. It was simply part of being alive. Imagine spending your entire life beside campfires. Every meal you ever ate was cooked over smoke. Every conversation happened beside smoke. Every winter night, every hunting expedition, every story passed from one generation to the next, unfolded beside the same drifting clouds rising into the darkness. For hundreds of thousands of years, smoke became an almost permanent companion of human life. But eventually, something changed. People began noticing that not every fire felt the same. Sometimes branches were burned, sometimes dry grass, sometimes leaves, roots, seeds, or unfamiliar wild plants collected during the day's hunt. Each one produced a different kind of smoke. Most changed nothing. But every now and then, one of those plants produced something else entirely. Some plants released compounds capable of affecting the human brain. Our ancestors didn't know anything about chemistry. They had no idea what cannabinoids, alkaloids, or terpenes were. They couldn't explain why one fire made them feel completely normal, while another left them unusually calm, relaxed, or deeply focused. They only knew what they experienced. Today, modern science gives us part of the answer. The human body contains something called the endocannabinoid system, a biological network that helps regulate memory, mood, appetite, sleep, and pain. It wasn't created because humans discovered cannabis. It evolved naturally millions of years before anyone intentionally burned the plant. That means when prehistoric people accidentally inhaled smoke containing cannabinoids, their brains were already capable of responding to it. Nature had built the lock, long before humanity discovered the key. Now imagine that moment. A hunter returns after a long, exhausting day. Someone throws an unfamiliar bundle of plants onto the fire. The smoke changes almost instantly. A few minutes later, he notices something unusual. His body feels lighter. His thoughts slow down. The tension from the day's hunt begins to disappear. He doesn't understand why. He has no language to describe what he's experiencing, but he remembers it. And the next time he finds that same plant, he throws it into the fire again. That simple act may have changed human history forever. Not because anyone planned it, not because anyone invented smoking, but because human beings have always remembered experiences that made them feel different. History is full of discoveries that happen by accident. Fire itself may have been one of them, and smoking may belong on that same list. But this is where we need to separate possibility from evidence. Suggesting that prehistoric humans accidentally inhaled psychoactive smoke is one thing. Proving that they intentionally burned specific plants is something else entirely. Fortunately, archaeology allows us to follow that trail. The oldest direct evidence of intentional cannabis smoking comes from the Pamir Mountains in Central Asia. Inside burial sites dating to around 500 BC, archaeologists discovered wooden braziers filled with heat-blackened stones. When scientists analyzed the residue left behind, they found traces of cannabis containing unusually high levels of THC. This wasn't ordinary wild cannabis gathered by chance. Someone had deliberately selected these plants, placed them onto heated stones, and allowed the smoke to fill the surrounding space during a ceremonial burial. Over 2,500 years ago, people were already using smoke intentionally, not simply as fire, but as an experience. For a long time, many researchers believed this was where the story of smoking truly began. But archaeology has one frustrating limitation. It can only study what time has allowed to survive. Stone tools can remain buried for millions of years. Plants cannot. Leaves decay, seeds rot, wood disappears, leather slowly returns to the soil. A simple wooden pipe can vanish completely after only a few centuries, leaving almost no trace behind. That means the absence of older smoking tools doesn't necessarily mean ancient people weren't smoking. It may simply mean the evidence disappeared thousands of years before archaeologists ever arrived. And that's exactly why another piece of evidence becomes so important. It comes from the ancient Greek historian Herodotus. Writing in the 5th century BC, he described a nomadic people known as the Scythians. According to his account, after certain ceremonies, they entered small enclosed tents, heated large stones until they glowed red, and scattered hemp seeds across them. Within seconds, the tents filled with thick clouds of smoke. Herodotus wrote that the Scythians didn't cough or flee from the smoke. They celebrated it. He even described them shouting with pleasure as the smoke surrounded them. For centuries, historians questioned his story. Maybe he exaggerated. Maybe he misunderstood what he had witnessed. Or perhaps it was simply another dramatic tale from the ancient world. Then archaeology caught up. Excavations of Scythian burial mounds uncovered bronze braziers, burned stones, and cannabis residue almost exactly matching Herodotus's description. Suddenly, what had sounded like an unbelievable story became one of the strongest historical accounts of ancient smoking ever confirmed. Sometimes the oldest writers weren't inventing myths. They were simply describing a world we've forgotten. Now let's turn to the plant most people immediately associate with smoking: tobacco. Surprisingly, tobacco wasn't humanity's first smoking plant. For most of human history, entire civilizations had never even seen it. That's because tobacco evolved naturally in the Americas. Europe didn't know it. Asia didn't know it. Africa didn't know it. For thousands of years, the Old World lived without any knowledge of tobacco at all. Everything changed in 1492. When Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean, his crew noticed something completely unfamiliar. Indigenous men and women walked through their villages carrying slowly burning rolls of dried leaves. They inhaled the smoke calmly before exhaling it through their mouths and noses as if it were the most natural thing in the world. To the Europeans, it looked strange. To the indigenous people, It was simply tradition. And like so many moments in history, as often happens throughout history, curiosity arrived long before explanation. But tobacco's story didn't begin with Columbus. By the time Europeans first stepped onto Caribbean shores, indigenous peoples had already been using tobacco for thousands of years. Archaeologists have found chemical traces of tobacco inside ancient pipes dating back at least 3,500 years in what is now the southeastern United States. Some researchers believe that history stretches even further, possibly 10,000 years or more, reaching back to some of the earliest communities in the Americas. But perhaps the most surprising discovery isn't how old tobacco is. It's why people used it. Today, smoking is usually associated with habit, addiction, or recreation. For many indigenous cultures, it meant something completely different. Tobacco was sacred. It accompanied healing ceremonies. It sealed agreements between tribes. It honored ancestors. It was offered during rituals and believed to carry prayers into the spirit world. To them, smoke wasn't simply drifting through the air. It was alive, a messenger traveling between the human world and something beyond it. That belief shaped the way tobacco was treated. It wasn't consumed casually. It wasn't abused. It was approached with discipline, respect, and purpose. A shaman lighting tobacco wasn't taking a break. He was performing a ceremony that his community believed connected the living with the unseen. That distinction matters, because the idea of smoking as an everyday habit is surprisingly recent compared to the thousands of years during which it remained deeply spiritual. But the story doesn't stop there. In 2019, archaeologists uncovered evidence that pushed the timeline even further back. At a site in Utah's Great Salt Lake Desert, researchers discovered a 12,000-year-old hearth containing seeds from a wild tobacco species called Nicotiana attenuata. No pipes were found, no smoking tools, only an ancient fire, and tobacco seeds placed inside it. The discovery immediately raised new questions. Were people simply burning the plant, using it in ceremonies? Or were they already inhaling its smoke thousands of years before the earliest known pipes were ever invented? No one can answer that question with complete certainty. But archaeology has taught us one lesson over and over again. One excavation can overturn decades of accepted history. What seems impossible today can become accepted fact tomorrow. And that leads to an even bigger question. If people in North America were experimenting with wild tobacco 12,000 years ago, what were humans doing everywhere else? By then, our species had already spread across Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia. The landscapes were different, the climates were different, the plants were different, but the human brain was exactly the same. Could different groups of people have reached the same discovery completely independently? Many anthropologists believe they could have, because throughout history, humans have displayed one remarkably consistent behavior. They've always searched for ways to change the way they feel. They fermented fruit into alcohol, chewed stimulating leaves, consumed psychedelic mushrooms, burned aromatic herbs, and inhaled smoke. Again and again, across continents that had never met each other. It's such a widespread pattern that some researchers believe this behavior isn't simply cultural. It may be biological. One of the best-known explanations is called the intoxication hypothesis. Psychopharmacologist Ronald Siegel suggested that the pursuit of altered states may be as deeply rooted in our biology as hunger, thirst, or reproduction. Whether every scientist agrees with that idea is still debated, but one fact is difficult to ignore. Humans have been seeking altered states throughout recorded history. And strangely enough, we aren't the only animals that do it. Elephants have been observed deliberately eating fermented fruit. Reindeer in Siberia consume psychoactive mushrooms. Even dolphins appear to interact with toxic pufferfish in ways that may produce mild intoxicating effects. Long before humans asked these questions, nature had already been running the experiment. Long before humans ever appeared. Perhaps prehistoric people were simply doing what curious animals have always done. Trying something new, learning from experience, remembering what worked. avoiding what didn't. Sometimes that knowledge came at an enormous cost. One mistake could make someone violently ill. Another could be fatal. There were no doctors, no warning labels, no scientific explanations, only observation, memory, and survival. The people who survived passed that knowledge to the next generation, not through books, not through classrooms, but through stories shared beside the fire. For tens of thousands of years, that was humanity's greatest library. But smoke wasn't only changing the way people felt, it may also have been changing the way people trusted one another. For most of human history, survival depended on the group. A single hunter rarely survived alone. Communities did. The stronger the bond between people, the better their chances of surviving another winter, another hunt, or another migration. That raises an interesting possibility. Perhaps some smoking rituals weren't only spiritual or medicinal, perhaps they also helped hold communities together. Modern neuroscience has shown that shared rituals strengthen trust, reinforce group identity, and increase cooperation. Ancient humans knew nothing about brain chemistry, but they understood something through experience. Doing meaningful things together brought people closer. Imagine a small group gathered inside a shelter after sunset. The fire burns quietly in the center. Aromatic smoke slowly fills the space. Everyone breathes the same air. Everyone shares the same experience. Whether they believed they were speaking with spirits, honoring ancestors, or simply preparing for the next hunt, the result may have been the same. The group became stronger. Trust grew. Fear faded. In that sense, smoke may have been one of humanity's earliest social technologies. Not entertainment, not escapism, a way of creating unity. Because in prehistoric life, cooperation wasn't simply important, it was survival. But every story eventually changes, and this one changed dramatically. For thousands of years, smoke was closely connected to ritual, medicine, healing, and community. Then history took a different path. When tobacco reached Europe after Columbus's voyages, it spread with astonishing speed. Within only a few generations, what had once been treated as something sacred slowly became something ordinary. Curiosity became commerce. Tradition became business. By the 1600s, tobacco was traded across Europe. By the 1700s, powdered tobacco had become fashionable among the aristocracy. By the 1800s, cigars were everywhere. And by the early 20th century, the invention of mass-produced cigarettes transformed smoking forever. What indigenous cultures had developed over thousands of years as a controlled and meaningful practice became an industrial product manufactured for millions of consumers. The plant hadn't changed. Human intentions had. The 20th century pushed that transformation even further. Large tobacco companies discovered something that ancient cultures had never tried to achieve. Instead of asking how tobacco could serve people, they began asking how people could serve tobacco. Scientific research inside the industry revealed that cigarettes caused enormous harm, yet for decades, much of that information was hidden from the public. Advertising campaigns presented smoking as glamorous, sophisticated, and even healthy. Doctors appeared in advertisements. Celebrities promoted cigarettes. Entire generations grew up believing that smoking was simply part of modern life. The contrast is impossible to ignore. A shaman standing beside a ceremonial fire and a tobacco executive sitting in a corporate boardroom were both working with the same plant. But almost everything else had changed. One used smoke to strengthen community, ritual, and belief. The other helped transform it into one of the world's most profitable consumer products. That may be one of the greatest cultural transformations in human history. So, when did ancient humans actually start smoking? The honest answer is that no one knows. The oldest archaeological evidence takes us back roughly 12,000 years with reasonable confidence. Other discoveries prove intentional smoking at least 2,500 years ago. But the behavior itself may be far older. Perhaps as old as fire. Perhaps as old as the first humans who noticed that one burning plant felt different from another. What we do know is this. Long before agriculture, long before pottery, long before cities, people were already experimenting with smoke. Different cultures chose different plants. They developed different rituals. They found different purposes. Yet one behavior appeared almost everywhere humans lived. They inhaled smoke intentionally. There's something strangely poetic about that. Despite everything separating us from our ancestors, our technology, our medicine, our modern lives, we still share some of the same experiences they did tens of thousands of years ago. We still gather around fires, we still watch smoke rise into the night, and every time we do, we're witnessing something that has accompanied humanity since the very beginning. In the end, this story may never have been about tobacco at all. Perhaps it's about curiosity, about observation, about the uniquely human habit of discovering something unexpected, remembering it, and passing that knowledge to the next generation. Because that's how civilization has always grown. One discovery shared around one fire, one story at a time. But maybe the most surprising part of this entire story isn't when humans started smoking. It's why they kept doing it. The first people who inhaled smoke weren't trying to build an industry. They weren't chasing addiction. They weren't following trends. They were exploring, learning, observing the world around them one experience at a time. Over thousands of years, those experiences became rituals. Those rituals became traditions. And those traditions became part of human history. Some were used for healing, some for spiritual ceremonies, some to strengthen communities. Others simply faded away with time. The plants changed, the cultures changed, the beliefs changed, but the behavior remained. Because beneath every civilization, beneath every empire, beneath every religion, humans have always been driven by the same instinct: curiosity, the desire to ask one simple question: what happens if I try this? That question gave us fire. It gave us agriculture. It gave us medicine. And perhaps it also gave us smoking. We'll probably never discover the first person who intentionally inhaled smoke. Their name has been lost for tens of thousands of years. No bones tell their story. No cave painting records the moment. No ancient text remembers what they were thinking. Only the behavior survived, passed from one generation to the next until it became older than history itself. So the next time you smell wood smoke drifting through the air, pause for a moment. That scent has followed humanity for hundreds of thousands of years. It surrounded Homo erectus. It drifted through Neanderthal camps. It rose above the fires of early Homo sapiens. It filled Scythian ritual tents. It carried prayers for indigenous shamans. It warmed families long before cities, kingdoms, or written language ever existed. The smoke is almost the same. Humanity is what changed. And maybe that's the real story. Not how humans learned to smoke, but how one simple breath became part of the long, complicated story of what it means to be human.